Hello and welcome to today's special webinar event entitled The Levers of Human Deception, the Science and Methodology Behind Social Engineering. Today's webinar is sponsored by KnowBe4 and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is David Davis of Actual Tech Media, and I'm excited to be the moderator for today's event. I'm honored to introduce you first off to today's presenter, Mr. Eric Krohn. Eric is a security awareness advocate at KnowBe4. Eric, thanks for being on today.
Always happy to be here, David.
All right. Now, before we get started, I should tell you, Eric's got some amazing content, some mind-blowing content to present today. But I've got a little bit of housekeeping here to cover. So first off, we want this to be a very educational event. So I encourage you to answer or ask as many questions as you'd like. We'll be answering all the questions that come in. We'll be doing our best to get to all of those. We have engineers standing by to answer those questions, and I'll be answering questions while Eric is presenting as best as I can. And we'll have a dedicated Q&A session for the end of the event. So we'll be saving those the best of those questions for that Q&A session. Second, in the handout tab of your GoToWebinar control panel there, you'll see that we have two handouts that you can download. These are from KnowBe4. One is a white paper on how to fortify your organization's last layer of security, your employees. A really nice paper. Make sure you check that out. Also, there is the 2018 Phishing by Industry Benchmark Report. Make sure that you download that out. Some really interesting statistics are in there. Share those with your friends and colleagues, and I'm sure that they'll be impressed. And then third, at the end of this webinar, we'll be awarding a $300 gift card to one lucky attendee on the live event today. If you're watching this webinar on demand, I'm sorry the drawing has already occurred. And if you are the winner of that gift card, you can optionally donate the prize value of that to one of our selected charities. Thanks to generous prize winners, we have seen thousands of dollars go to charities. So thank you in advance if you choose to do that. The official prize terms and conditions for today's drawing can be found at actualtechmedia.com and scroll down to prize terms and conditions. So with that, let's do a quick review here of what you're going to learn on today's webinar. First off, we'll be talking about the perception versus the reality when it comes to social engineering. And then you'll understand by the end of today's event what they call OODA, or Observe, Orient, Decide, and Act. You'll learn about that. Eric's got some cool info on that. You'll learn about how social engineers and scam artists achieve their goals by subverting the OODA loop and the different components of that. And then finally, how to defend yourself and your organization. And with that, I'm excited to turn it over to today's presenter. Take it away, Eric.
Hey, thank you so much. Always love doing these presentations. Got a lot of fun stuff in this one here. Again, levers of human deception. This is one of my favorite topics, really, when we start getting into the psychology behind these phishing attacks, right? We know that phishing is pretty brutal. We know that it's happening. There are very few people that you'll talk to that don't say that this is one of the biggest threats that we face these days. But we don't always understand or give credit to how complex these attacks are, right? And the psychology behind them. So this is one of my favorite things to do here. I hope you enjoy this. Please ask questions. Always enjoy the Q&A section here. So if you got any questions, let us know. A little bit about me, my background. I've been doing IT and security since back in the mid-1990s. You know, I started out back in the days of FidoNet and BBSs and that sort of thing. Throughout the years, you know, I've had a number of different positions. I ended up the security manager for the U.S. Army's 2nd Regional Cyber Center Western Hemisphere. And if we have a few CISSPs out there, which no doubt we do, I was the Director of Member Relations and Services for ISC Squared for a couple of years. Now it's just my honor to be able to do this sort of work for KnowBe4 here, where I get to go around and basically talk about my experience and things that I've seen and I've learned over the years. Hopefully share them with some of these other folks that are out there, give you all a chance to you know, understand a little bit more about what's going on. Now, if you don't know about KnowBe4, that's who we are. We do security awareness training and simulated phishing. That's our world, 23,000 customers. That matters because we hear the stories. We get to see the things going on. We really get a good view of what's going on in the phishing world. What we do then is we turn those into phishing templates you can use to help train your users in more of a fail-safe environment. And we'll talk a little bit about that, but ultimately what we're talking about here is stuff that we've learned and things that we see out there constantly. So hopefully by sharing this, you can get a lot of good information out of it. Now, to start, we have to understand that this is not something that's new, right? And warfare is a strong word. These attacks, though, are pretty significant, and they are coming from nation states in some cases. So there are places where phishing is warfare. Not every attack is a warfare attack, but we have to understand that a lot of the money and stuff that is raised from this is also being used to support groups that we may or may not like. And ultimately what it boils down to is deception is the key of what's going on, right? Art of War, it's a book, been out for a couple of years. This again is nothing new. But what we find is that it continuously gets more and more refined. And what we're seeing these days in these attacks is very, very refined. It's not the Nigerian prince scam. The days of the grammar and spelling errors, that's pretty much gone. We're in a day and an age where AI is being leveraged in these attacks, where we're seeing the complexity really, really ramp up. There's even services on the dark web where you can submit your emails that you're planning on sending as part of a phishing attack, and there are services that will fix the grammar errors, fix the spelling errors, make it more effective, and they'll actually guarantee a higher click rate based on their services, right? Now, we know that about 98% of attacks rely on social engineering. We know that, these attackers, they really go for the low-hanging fruit, which is the humans. Now, we've done a pretty good job of building up very strong perimeter defenses. Our outside coming in, we do pretty good at. But what you see and what you hear more and more often is the attackers will go after the person on the inside of the network as well. Now, these attackers, they're not like the old days, the kid in the basement drinking Mountain Dew, eating pizza. This isn't how this works. These are organizations, sometimes very, very well honed and organized organizations, right? Even organized crime. And they look at ROI. They look at things like that. So, the mindset is, well, I can spend a week trying to throw exploits at this thing, trying to get in through the perimeter, trying to get through whatever. Or I can spend 30 minutes, put together a phishing attack, get someone on the inside to click on it and go from there, right? Which do you think they're going to go for? It only makes sense. This is why they're going after the humans so much. The fact is we can't seem to protect ourselves, or over the years, we have not been putting the same effort into protecting ourselves through the human factor as we have through the outside. And unfortunately, it's still a glaring hole in a lot of our security programs. Hopefully, after seeing this, we understand a little bit more about what we're talking about here, why we're trying to do this, and how these guys are doing these attacks. So we're going to talk a little bit, like we said, perception versus reality dilemma, understanding the OODA loop, understanding how they achieve their goals by subverting different parts of that OODA loop, and how we can defend ourselves and our organization. So starting with perception versus reality dilemma. I love this. I'm actually going to do a magic trick on the interwebs, right? Totally magical. What I want you to do right now is I want you to pick one of these cards. You can pick any card you want. I'm actually going to make this card disappear. So get that card in your mind now through the magic of the internet and PowerPoint. I want to know, is your card gone? And okay, I am betting every one of you said yes. There's a reason behind that, because your card is definitely gone. The way that's done, we start with this deck here. We end with this deck right here. So what you'll notice is these are two completely different sets of cards. But by rushing you, by by not giving you information, by getting you to focus on one thing, which is picking a card and remembering what that card is, most likely most people don't even notice. Now there's patterns put in place here. You'll notice red king, black king, red queen, that sort of thing. That pattern there is made in such a way that you won't notice the difference in the patterns. Okay. Pretty interesting way to do this, but unfortunately, this is the kind of things that people do to do these attacks. We were thinking one thing. We never, or most of us probably never assumed that it was a total change of cards. Just something to keep in mind, how easy that is to do, right? And have you ever had a magic trick on the internet? Well, now you have, right? It's important to understand the root of this deception. And it comes down to our brains. And our brain's job is to filter, interpret, and present reality. Now, this may be a hard thing to swallow because we think what we know is absolute and reality. It's very difficult for us to understand that what we think may not be what's real. There's been a couple of really cool things that have happened in the last couple of years that have broken that wide open for the masses and made us think about how our brain filters, interprets, and presents reality. For example, was that dress black and blue or was it white and gold? What was your reality? Now, I've actually been able to see it both ways. I default to the black and blue, but by sitting certain ways, by doing certain things, I was on a couple of occasions able to see it in the other color. So, what does that tell you about our brains? What does that tell you about our reality, right? Our reality is dependent on our brain's filters. It's just like the Yanni and Laurel audio that we heard. Same sort of thing. Your brain filters out a lot of things and presents you with reality. So what if you can get in there and you can tweak some of that? What if you can mess with that a little bit and try to present the reality that you want it to be, only it's not really that reality? One of the ways to do that is to, change your focus, what you're focused on, what you're looking at, and then you ignore other parts that would come together and help in the filters. Now, every single one of us out there, we have filters. These filters are built by our life experiences, by the things we've done, the people we see. All of this comes together to build these filters. And quite frankly, there's not a lot we can do to really change that. The way that we do this is through critical thinking. Critical thinking helps us understand where we may be incorrect and what our filters are telling us, okay? So what happens is the attackers, they like to go after that critical thinking step. So moving on here, we're going to talk a little bit about the OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, and act. Before we do that, I want to show you a couple of things here with the brain too. First of all, this is from the official CIA Manual of Trickery and Deception. I just love saying that. It's just a very cool thing to say. I don't know why that middle author is redacted. I'm guessing the other two are probably dead or whatever at this point. But in this case, what it's doing is it's talking about like how to slip something into someone's drink. And the way they're doing this is by lighting a cigarette. For those that are, of my age, smoking was a very popular thing back in the day. No, we didn't vape. Basically, we had to carry around a pocket full of fire to keep our cigarettes going. Well, what happens here is by taking this person and offering them a light for their cigarette, you're now waving fire in front of their face. Their focus is going to be on that fire. I can talk. I used to smoke. I can speak from firsthand. If somebody is waving fire a couple of inches in front of your face, your focus is on where that cigarette meets the fire, not, trying to light your face on fire. In the meantime, this is when they're making the move and dropping something in the drink. Now, again, when there's something, if there's fire in front of me, you could probably remove the table and I'm not going to notice. I'm totally focused on that piece, lighting that cigarette with the fire, which is potentially dangerous, right? it's interesting how we can redirect focus like that. And if you think about it, how you can be blind to the things around you when you get hyper focused on one thing. The attackers know this. They know how to do this. Age-old trick, as you can tell by the drawings here. The other thing, and this is something that's real common, making yourself less of a threat through your body language. We all see body language. There are times, if you've ever been in a place and you're like, ooh, I feel uncomfortable, but you don't even consciously know why. But somebody's staring at you from out of the corner of your eye. You don't even notice it, but you kind of, your subconscious picks that sort of stuff up, right? This is all of our brain doing filters and feeding us stuff, right? In this case, you have two pictures of this gentleman right here. On the left, looks alert. Imagine you're in a room. You're going to be talking a little bit here about something that's potentially classified or sensitive or something like that, right? So what do? You look around the room, you try to see if anyone's paying attention. You got this guy staring at you like that. He's alert, he's awake, he's looking put together. You may not talk about that thing. Now, on the flip side, the guy on the right looks like he's been run over by a bus, kind of tired, had a really bad day, shirt's unpulled, hair's a mess. You look at that guy and your brain typically just says, this is not a threat. This is not an alert human being, not a threat. Now you talk about these sorts of things and they can pick it up, right? In the case of a zombie apocalypse, these two would flip. The alert one is your friendly one, the other one not quite so much, but you kind of get the idea. This is teaching people how to reduce their threat to other people. Again, this is how our brains work against us, work with us, kind of try to, they take some of this off on the subconscious, but it's something that we can prey on. Now, spies, magicians, pickpockets, con artists, they use the same principles we're about to discuss here as we go into this OODA loop thing and things that we're talking about here. And it's amazing. I've seen, I was at an event and there was a guy there he was a magician. And what he would do is he would take these like little foam rubber balls and he would, they'd show up in the crook of your arm and stuff. And he did that to me. He came over and he did this. And I was like, okay, boom. And he jostled me around and bam, next thing I know, I got this little foam rubber thing in the crook of my arm. And I was like, wow, that was amazing. So I had him do it again. And this time I was kind of conscious that the attack was coming as opposed to being unsure what was going to happen. And now that I knew that he was going to work that in there, I could feel the point where he put it in there and moved my arm around to distract me, to pull my focus onto my right arm instead of my left. By knowing that the attack was happening and by being conscious about it and not having my focus move, I was able to spot when he did that. It was an amazing thing. He was able to remove watches from people wearing them or put them on people that weren't wearing them, all by distracting them and refocusing them on something else. It's pretty amazing how our brains work when it comes to that. So the OODA loop is really a model for decision making. Now, this was built through aviation, a guy named John Boyd, having to do with, fighter pilots. This guy here, Blue Angels, you might have heard of them. If you look in his visor, you can see he's about 6 centimeters away from the next plane next to him. These people fly in incredibly tight formation at high speeds, doing some pretty wild stuff. How do they do that? Well, this was designed for this sort of thing, right? Naval and aviation warfare when it comes to in the air like this. So the OODA loop is basically observe, orient, decide, and act. So the first step is you observe. You see what's going on around you, all right? And this stuff really happens kind of automatically. It happens all the time. When we're in a situation, this becomes more critical. But you observe, then you orient. Where am I in the middle of this chaos that's going on around me? Or maybe it's not chaos, but hey. And then you decide what you're going to do. That's a conscious decision, the critical thinking piece. Then you act. Whatever action you have loops back around and you observe, okay, where am I now? What is going on around me? Where am I in the midst of everything now? Did my move help? Did it hurt? Did it put me in a place where I expected? You decide what you're going to do with that. This is just a constant loop that's going on through your head, these 4 steps, right? The first 3 are part of critical thinking. All right. And I love the quotes that we have here from John Boyd. He talks about get inside the adversary's OODA loop, and it will make us appear ambiguous or unpredictable and generate confusion and disorder among our adversaries. So if you can disrupt their OODA loop, then we can generate confusion and disorder. Okay, that's what the attackers do here. And disruption is usually going after one of the first three steps there, seeing if they can drive you straight into the action part of what you're doing here. Okay, so we're going to talk about that a little bit here. We're going to talk about how social engineers and scam artists achieve their goals by subverting those different components. Now, as we roll into this, this is one of my favorite shows. Season 1 and 2, very big fan. But this is from Mr. Robot. So Elliot Alderson, I love this quote. I've always loved this since I watched this. There's so much social engineering in this show. I've never find it hard to hack most people. If you listen to them and watch them, their vulnerabilities are like a neon sign screwed into their heads. This is very, very true. And we see this in practice with the attackers, not just in phishing, but in social engineering in general. If you've ever been to DEF CON, there's something called the Social Engineering Village. I highly recommend it if you've never been there. Essentially what you have is you have some people that are, they're given a company to gather information on, and points are awarded based on the kind of information that these participants in this social engineering experiment can get from these customers. Okay, they basically go up in a big soundproof booth that has some microphones in it, so you can hear what's going on the outside, but it's soundproof, and a couple hundred people sitting there watching this, and they start dialing these organizations. They start dialing them and get on the phone with them, and they start asking them questions that seem a little bit innocuous, but they're gathering information. They'll be pretending to be from another, maybe another branch or something, going, man, I'm having a lot of computer problems. Are you having problems too? Or is it just us over in this branch? Oh, okay. I think it may be like my antivirus that's doing it. Do you have antivirus on your machine? Okay. Does it have the yellow little badge down there? Well, by learning that, you know what version of antivirus or what type of antivirus they're working with. You can get around that. I've seen them ask questions like, hey, our security badges are always giving us a hard time. Do you have the kind that you like swipe, or do you have the kind that you beep against the little door panel thing there? Oh, you don't have any badges at all? Wow. Okay. You must be lucky. They're gathering points on this, but this is getting in there and just asking these people. Now, one of the tricks to getting these folks to open up is to spend a little time in the beginning of the call. They'll spend the first minute or two trying to find some common ground with these people, and trying to find out how they're going to react to certain types of interrogation. So some people, if you're very aggressive, the people will back away. Some people, if you're aggressive, they will push back hard. So they'll try a couple of techniques like that. Some people just want to be helpful. So you're kind of feeling your way around in that. Once you can figure out, is this a person that is going to be affected by me being aggressive? Is this person going to be someone who's affected by me looking for help? Like, oh, I've got this horrible thing going on. Once you can do that, you have now spotted those neon signs that are screwed into their heads. Their big vulnerability, and now it's up to you to kind of play that. It's amazing how much information they can get from these folks just by playing to their weaknesses, their vulnerabilities, and spending the first minute, 30 seconds or minute of the call figuring out how they're going to do the attack. So when it comes to these sorts of things, when these attacks are going on, again, the ideal situation for a social engineer is to hijack the OODA loop by creating the knee-jerk action. In other words, bypassing those first three steps and drive straight into the action. Now, this is done oftentimes through getting people upset, right? Angry. Anger and outrage are two human emotions that drive action very, very quickly. If you think about situations, you may or may not have noticed politically, we've been a little bit charged here in the US for a couple of years now. It is very easy to get people riled up through political attacks. And so folks, these attackers will do something and they'll say, can you believe so-and-so did this? Blah, 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 blah. And they'll throw all this politics in it, and it happens on both sides. And then they'll say something like, if you want to stop this, sign this petition. There'll be a link in there, and they'll gather all kinds of information about somebody or try to take them to a site that's not, that's got issues, that's infected, maybe get some malware on there. But a lot of times they're trying to get credentials, et cetera, sign this petition using your Google account, getting credential phished. This is done by upsetting these people and then turning around and getting them to go straight into the action without really thinking about it, without really going through those critical thinking steps. This is an example of something we saw last year, which just really riles me up. It still does. It upsets me because, frankly, they don't care. Whenever something significant happens, whenever there's something that's tumultuous going on out there and there's this tension, they will attack this turmoil and they will use it against you. Obviously, we had issues with school shootings, and that was going on last year. People were very, very attuned to that. Obviously, huge amounts of emotion around that, and we saw these going out. This is an actual reported email, and this was it was a university campus. The idea here was, hello all, emergency scare earlier reported on campus. Kindly go through the memo released and please follow the outline protocol. Now, in this case, they knew that they used Microsoft for the email there. So what they did is they sent them to a credential phishing page. The individuals would put in their information. Next thing you know, the email account is taken over by the attackers. This was something that was very, very popular. We saw it under different things. As you can see, the other variants down there on the bottom lines there. It was very popular and it was actually very effective. So they would target these universities and they knew what email providers they used, and they would change that out. It could be a Microsoft one, it could be a Google login, it could be Outlook, it could be whatever it is. That's not hard to do. Today, what we're actually seeing is another step with that too, where they're doing more and more phishing of the second factor. In other words, if you're set up where you get your email, you log in with your username and password, it sends you a code through text message, and then has you put that code in, they're actually having you, after they fool you into entering your credentials, they'll pass that along to the login provider. It'll send you the text message just like you actually did it. And then when you put it in the box, then the bad guys just put it in the box. And it logs them in. We're seeing this happen more and more often. That's one of the problems with two-factor authentication using SMS. It's a little bit easier to intercept like that. But they're getting better and better at this. Credentials are, it's a prime target of the attackers. They can do a lot once they're in there with that. So another kind of attack that uses this a lot is business email compromise. What happens with business email compromise is there's really no payload to this, generally speaking. These are designed totally to social engineer people. We see it with CEO fraud. And what that means is basically people who the attackers pretend to be the CEO or an executive in the organization, and they turn around and they use that authority to try to get other people to do things. So they may send an email that says, hey, I need you to go get a bunch of iTunes gift cards. I got to give them to all these people. I'm not there right now. Get them right now. Send me the codes as soon as you have them so I can give these gift cards to these people, so on and so forth. We're actually seeing that a lot, and people are falling for it. Thousands of dollars in iTunes gift cards. It blows my mind. But because the executive has authority, people are afraid to question that. So if the big boss man says do it, they do it. It's unfortunate, but we also see the same sort of thing happen with wire transfers. I'm in a meeting today. I need you to transfer $50,000 to the account that I'm about to give you. We're acquiring this organization. We're buying into it, or whatever the story is. I got to go back in and do that. Deal with that part. I need you to wire this money right now as a good faith, or we're going to lose the deal. Or sometimes they'll come back and be like, hey, I sent you a message earlier. Why didn't you take care of it? And then become very aggressive. Again, it just depends on the targets. But most of these are done purely through getting people to kind of bypass their critical thinking and not go, the boss has never asked me to buy iTunes gift cards before. This seems like a weird request. Instead, they leverage urgency. They leverage threats, either open or covert or overt threats. Whatever it takes to get the emotions going, to get the people to take these actions. These are tough to catch through technology because oftentimes there's no payload. There's no link. There's nothing for the technology to catch. So it really comes up to the people to go, hey, wait a minute. I got an email and this kind of riled up some human emotions sort of thing. This soup of emotions. I need to step back for a second and take a breath and look at this again. That's what we really want people to do. Unfortunately, people just take that and move forward. Now, this is the first quarter here in the U.S. We've got tax things going on. We expect to have emails regarding tax forms, this, that, the other thing having to do with your tax stuff, verify your information. They know that. These attacks are going to start rolling out. This is an example of one here that they tried to roll in here to us at KnowBe4, using Stu Showerman, our CEO, using his name to try to get people to send the W-2 forms. Now, I see this every year. It always makes me sad because, well, frankly, what happens is when these bad guys get a hold of these W-2s, they turn around and they file taxes on behalf of all of these employees. All of these employees this year happen to get a refund. By the time the employees start filing their real taxes, it's too late. The attackers have taken the money, they're gone, and it opens up a huge, huge can of worms for the victims of these sorts of attacks. But basically, all it is an executive or a boss man saying, I need you to send me all of the W-2s in a PDF format. It's almost always PDF format. And I need to take care of this right away. Send them to me right now. And folks will do that. They'll take every employee's tax form, which has social security numbers, income numbers, all kinds of information on there. Again, the attackers will file that. They'll also turn around a lot of times and sell this information on the dark web, because that's a great way to create an identity or open accounts in that person's name, et cetera, et cetera. So we got to keep an eye on that. These, again, really focus on the human element and leveraging the authority that the executives have over regular users. Now, when it comes to the typical kinds of phishes that we have and how those are being, leveraged here, again, this is not the kind of stuff that we expect to see with the Nigerian print scam stuff. This is an actual phishing email here. This one apparently came from ADP Billing, but if you'll notice, it says message@adpr.com. There'll usually be some sort of little something that's off on that. Sometimes it's blatant, sometimes not. We're actually seeing cases too where they will use what's called puny code and some different actual languages that will be converted by your browser into what looks like a readable word. It may have a special mark over an E or something. A lot of times people consider that maybe dirt or dust on their screen. They don't pay any attention to it. But they're getting very tricky with this. They'll also, instead of having an M, they'll do an R and an N next to each other. Things that if you don't pay attention can trick the eye into that. This is one of the most common emails that we see all the time. It's invoicing. We all work in a land of invoices. If you hover on this link, it is not taking them to ADP. What it is likely doing is taking them into a login screen for ADP. They're trying to gather your credentials there. So if you have an ADP account, maybe they do payroll or something, and you've given up credentials, imagine what an attacker can do to that. But we see these, and what's interesting is these same emails may be leveraged for different types of payloads. In other words, some may take you somewhere and get you to open a document. Some may take you somewhere to try to get your credentials first. It just depends on how the attackers want to leverage it. Still, very, very common way to do it. Just like here, package or parcel delivery phish. End of the year, around Christmas, we see this all the time in the fourth quarter. If you'll notice on this one, it says it comes from FedEx, but the reply address is test1@merchminer.com. I got news for you folks. FedEx has their own domain. These are things that should be obvious to people, but if they don't know to look for them, they tend to fall for them. This does have a traditional logo there. We just blacked it out. But these are real. We see these from all of the different carriers. And basically they take a real attack or real notification and then just change things a little bit and send you to the other places. So could be a credential phish, could be lots of other things. Now this one's always fun to me because there is a lot more science to this than most people understand. If you've ever seen these, this is called clickbait. Okay. And I love these, they just wanted groceries. Nobody expected this. I have no idea what they circle and point to on some of this stuff. It makes absolutely no sense. But the idea is to get your attention. You won't believe what they caught the cashiers doing at this supermarket. Watch closely, right? So now you want to know what these cashiers were doing. There's science behind this. These clickbait ads leverage pattern interruption to generate curiosity, and they use what's called the information gap theory, right? And what this means is they form information gaps. And what happens is we get a feeling of deprivation because we're curious about it. We're used to having the information at our fingertips right now. We're so used to being able to look stuff up immediately that we feel deprived when we don't know what's going on. Not only that, especially in social media circles, memes come out, there's information going on all the time. Nobody likes to feel like the guy that's going, yeah, I don't really understand what that means, right? So we become so dependent on getting information or knowing the information right away. What these do is they give you enough information to make you curious, and then they remove the actual answer to it, and they want you to click on that so that you know the answer. Usually it's garbage, but it works very, very well with people. These will also sometimes, again, be ads that'll make you outraged or angry, or you won't believe what they caught the cashiers doing at this supermarket. Well, that makes you maybe curious and maybe a little bit like, oh, I don't like cashiers, whatever, or I don't like supermarkets, I can't stand supermarkets. These sorts of ads are designed to leverage those emotions. I do love the one in the bottom there. 5 things you need to know about clickbait. Number 4 will blow your mind. Folks, that is a clickbait ad about clickbait, which is fantastic. It's kind of like, Inception, and buildings are folding around us. And I just thought that was pretty funny how they ended up leveraging clickbait like that. So how do we defend ourselves against this, right? These attacks are coming pretty seriously, pretty often. Pretty much from the time you start checking your email in the morning to the time that you put your phone up in the evening, these attacks are rolling in. And these different kind of attacks, it's interesting. I've been talking to a couple of the guys here. We do a lot of looking at these attacks, and we really haven't seen a whole lot of things that are huge and new and just like never before seen. What we're seeing in the industry here is these attackers are kind of doubling down on the things that work very, very well. Instead of necessarily having to come up with new tips and things like that, they're just really, really focusing on refining the things that have been working well for them thus far. Now, this is from our Q3 infographic here. It's basically our top phishing test. This gives you an idea of what people will click on. It's always kind of interesting to see these sorts of things happen, right? LinkedIn, it's amazing. The click rate, 38% click rate on LinkedIn stuff. People tend to open themselves up on LinkedIn much more than they do, say, Facebook, okay? I know I'm that way. If somebody sends me a LinkedIn invite and it says, I sat in one of your sessions at whatever, or I sat 2 seats and a row behind you or whatever, I'm just like, yeah, accept. On Facebook, I'm a lot more cautious about who I accept. It's only family members, very close friends in Facebook. The attackers know this. They know this. And so LinkedIn, man, they hit people constantly on LinkedIn. The other thing about LinkedIn is a lot of people, if they're disgruntled, they don't like their job, they're going to go on LinkedIn and update their LinkedIn feeds. This is where recruiters hit you up. So people that are already in a state of kind of agitation sometimes can be targeted by folks through these LinkedIn things, and they still click, obviously. Now, the bottom one down there, I think this is always interesting. Your friend tagged a photo of you, 18% click rate. That's one of the things we see there. And basically, you'll get a message on Facebook, or you'll get a notification that you were tagged on a photo in something. And it's interesting how it gets people to wonder, like, oh, wow, I don't remember that, or why am I being tagged in this photo? Or, they want to see what's going on. They want to understand how their image is out there. For some people, image is everything. They're like, oh, that day my hair, it was not a good hair day whatsoever. I do not want a picture of me being tagged on that day, whatever it is. Very effective, but uses the emotions, sometimes the fear, like, why am I being tagged on this? Or, just the interest to get people to click. Very, very effective one as well. And there's a couple different spins on that. We've seen some pretty significant real world attacks based on those sorts of things. So what it boils down to is social engineering works on the lures, right? And so we got to kind of wonder sometimes, and we got to think about this. Am I being manipulated? Now, I mentioned it earlier. If you open an email and that email triggers an emotional response from you, it's time to take a deep breath. It's time to relax a little bit. And then it's time to go back and look at this with a critical thinking eye. They will use so many of these emotions against you, right? Greed, obviously, the Nigerian prince scam sort of thing. I'm going to give you a whole bunch of money for nothing. Well, yeah, okay. If you think about that critically, come on, it only makes sense. People get riled up, though. They think they're going to be rich for nothing. Curiosity, like the clickbait thing, right? Give you a little bit of information, deprive you of the answer. We want you to go do that. Self-interest, urgency. Now, urgency is used so often. If you see something that really gets you a sense of urgency, you really need to be careful with that. And again, these are things that we need to be teaching the end users. We need to be helping them understand that if you feel this way, report it to us as potential phishing, or think twice before you take an action on these things. Fear is definitely another one. Urgency and fear. It can be fear of losing your job. It can be fear of the unknown. It can be fear of lots of different things, right? And the last one, though, is kind of interesting. It's helpfulness. And helpfulness is definitely a lure that's used pretty effectively. There was a while there where there were a lot of these scams going on, and you still see them on occasion. But somebody gets an email and says, hey, I was traveling Europe and my wallet got stolen. My passport is gone. I'm stuck here. I don't have anyone else to turn to. Can you help me out? We got one of those when I was with the Army. It turned out our team lead was somewhere in Europe, had been, kind of stuck out there, no wallet, no passport, anything like that, desperate to get home. So we took up a collection in our team. I think we gathered like 68 cents to bring him home, which didn't make him super happy when he actually came in and found out, well, how much we had raised to bring him back. Obviously he wasn't out there. He wasn't stuck. But they use this sort of thing where people want to help other people, or you get those scams where somebody calls and says, hey, grandma, playing on the fact that sometimes they're a little confused in older ages, but hey, grandma, this is, so-and-so, I'm in jail. I don't know what to do. I can't get out. I need you to send some bail money, or I'm in a fix, or whatever, right? Those are helpfulness sorts of scams, and those can work very, very well on certain sorts of people. Now, it's important that people think about it. Where am I being distracted? You know, where are these lures? Where are these impacts, these emotions being used against me to remove those first few parts of the OODA loop there, to bypass all of that critical thinking step and go straight to the action. So when you're talking to your users, when you're dealing with the training on them, this is what you want them to understand a little bit more, is to have that where am I being distracted sort of thought when they look at these things. Now, when it comes to training end users, one of the things that I hear from people is, you know, we're never going to be able to teach them. And that's false. It really is. Where we mess up a lot of times is we try to get too technical in what we're trying to teach them. You do not want your people in accounting looking at email headers and trying to decide if it's a spoof message. That's really not something that you're going to do. And if you're going to try to, you know, train up everybody in your organization to be super technical, you're probably not going to do very well on that. However, if you teach them the right things, which is, hey, I had an emotional response to this, I need to be careful with it. Now let's check a couple other things. You can be remarkably successful. Now, here's a couple of the red flags that we try to teach people. There's 22 of them. Basically, it comes down to things like this. You know, did I get an email from my HR department at 2:00 in the morning on Saturday? And is that unusual? If it is, maybe I need to pay a little bit more attention to this thing. You know, does it look like it comes from the executive, like the CEO is for the first time ever emailing me directly asking me to do something? Man, that should really make you wonder, hey, something may be off a little bit here. This is an abnormal communication, right? If it's something that has a whole bunch of people on it that you don't know, also should raise a flag. You see what I'm saying? These are not things that are super complicated for people, but they're great indicators, great red flags to go, you know what, I'm a little concerned about this thing. You know, hyperlinks, hovering hyperlinks, and it doesn't match. We know these things as security professionals. Getting your people to think about that is where you want to be. Again, skip the whole, you know, we want you to look at email headers. Nope. Get them to look at this and then have them report these sorts of emails to somebody that has the skills to really dig into them. Now, again, going back to the statement, I've heard so many times, oh, you can't train users. You can. You absolutely can. This is actually something that I love this chart because this is not a small sample size, right? We did this study, 6 million people, 11,000 organizations. And basically what they did is they tracked these folks through the course of a year, from the time that they started through the training and through all of that to a year later, just to see where they were, right? Average click rate, and we're going to break this down a little bit by some of these industries so you can see the difference that it makes. But the average click rate started at 27% in these 6 million people. Within 90 days, it was down to 13%. Now, that's pretty significant. In 90 days, you've reduced the click rates by over half. Now, what happens here is if you just train the people and walk away and decide to come back a year later and have another training class, you are not going to see the benefits of that. It's going to curve right back up because people are not thinking about it anymore, right? If you space it too far apart like that, it'll be effective. It'll move the needle for a little while and go right back. Now, what we recommend you do is not only do you train them, teach them, but you phish them with simulated phishing attacks at least once per month. We found that that's kind of the sweet spot. The drop-off is pretty significant. People start forgetting after 1 month. But if you can do it every couple weeks, that's even better. You do these simulated attacks. The idea behind the simulated attacks is you take the information you gave them in training, and then you give them a chance to practice that and spot these things in a fail-safe environment. In other words, if they mess up on one of your simulated attacks, it's not going to burn your network down. It's not going to cause an outage. It's not going to, wreak havoc on the other users. This is why it's very important. You want them to be able to practice there. The other thing that happens is if you start out fairly easy and then you make them a little bit tougher over time, what's going to happen here is they're going to build up some confidence. They're going to get more confident in what they're doing and be more likely to report these things and do better moving forward, right? So these 6 million people at the end of a year, we're down to a 2% click rate, just over 2%. That is significant. Now, keep in mind, this was a huge swath of people. The main things that they used to qualify were that they were phished at least once a month and they had their training. That was basically the qualifiers for these folks. So it wasn't like they cherry picked these. We see this all the time. You can train these folks to be much, much better. The other thing is, and I'll talk about why this is in a moment, that 12-month number, that 2% is usually on harder emails than the initial click rate at 27%. So you can absolutely make huge changes, even starting very quickly, but continuing on, getting better and better throughout the year. Now, just to give you an idea, this was the case study information here. I'm not going to dwell on this slide too much, but it's pretty interesting how this all came together. And I want to talk about a few things here. Now, again, 27% average initial baseline. This was the overall average, okay? So in smaller organizations under 250 people, the average phish prone percentage, 30.1%. I want you to think about that. Phishing is bad. Phishing is driving ransomware. It's driving CEO fraud. It's driving all kinds of malware and nightmares. And on average, a 30.1% click rate. That should scare people, right? 28.5 for 250 to 999, and what we call enterprises 1,000 or larger, we're about 25%, which is still very, very high. If your users are running around clicking on 1 in 4 phishing emails that come in the door, you have a pretty serious problem, right? Those aren't good odds. Now, looking at this, you can see the individual industries. Pick where you are in there. If you look at manufacturing, man, 33.2% to start with. It's pretty brutal. Now we see those manufacturing is one of the ones that has been hit very, very hard by ransomware. We see that quite a bit. Education as well. Ransomware has been doing pretty nasty things in that. And then small to medium governments, we also see a lot of. Now, these are the results after the 90 days broken down by the industries. And I think it's really interesting. We've already dropped down to 13.1% on the small orgs from 30%. Think about that. And then 13.2, 14.1. Manufacturing dropped significantly too. It's very interesting to see how these reactions across industry happen here. And then finally, we end up at the end here 12 months later. So here's the deal, folks. You can train your people. That's really the whole thought of this exercise here is you can get them to spot these things and you can get those click rates down. That's really what I want you to understand here. It's not that hard to do. We really have like a 4-step process. Baseline test, this will kind of tell you where you start at. That's at 27%. That's from baseline tests, okay? Then you train them. That's your second step. Teach them what to look for. And you also use this to teach them about password hygiene and don't reuse your passwords and all that kind of good stuff. But then you do those simulated phishing attacks. And what's important is that 4th step 2, measure the results. So as they get better, what you do is you make them a little tougher. As they get better, you make them tougher, right? Keep with the positive reinforcement. Hey, you guys are doing so good. We're going to up our game a little bit here on these phishing tests. Make it something that's not scary. A lot of folks will gamify these sorts of things, but it's important to do those loops. And when it comes to training, what I recommend you do is once a year, do a big one, maybe a 45-minute training, something like that. but then at least each quarter, do a 3 to 5 minute that may be something that's applicable to that quarter. For example, first quarter, we know we're going to see tax scams. Why not do something that's quick and easy on like the CEO fraud or W-2 fraud stuff? Give them a couple of minutes to make them understand that, yes, these attacks are going to start coming your way. You're going to see these. It gets it in the front of their mind. It gets them thinking about it and gets them considering, kind of what they're going to do and how to deal with this. So that being said, that's about all the slides I have. I know we're going to open it up to Q&A here in just a moment, but I think first we have something to announce here, David.
We do, Eric. The prize winner of today's Amazon $300 gift card is Melissa Baxter of South Carolina. So congratulations to you. If you'd like to donate your prize to charity, we'd love to help you do that. And with that, Eric, let's take some questions from the audience here. If you haven't gotten your question in, you're thinking about phishing and social hacking and all those kind of things, you're wondering, you're scratching your head, now's the time to get your question in. So Eric, while we do that, why don't you pop up your next steps there, contact info, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Let's leave that up there for folks to check that out. So let's see, first question that came in here, they're asking about is, let's see, so how are cyber criminals so successful in getting users to click on links in email? Are people just gullible, or what do you say, Eric?
I think that's part of it. I mean, human nature oftentimes is trusting, right? And so they trust these sorts of things. The other things that they do is they mix in those things like those PO, the purchase order or invoice attacks in the middle of all this other business going on, right? They know end of month is a prime time to hit people in that. Things are busy. People are trying to close books. They're trying to move stuff around. They'll focus on busy times. They'll focus on, whatever they can. Again, this is a business. This really isn't just a bunch of folks going at this haphazardly. There's planning behind these attacks, and there's a lot of data behind what works. These folks, they get together out there and they work on their trade. They share information about what works, what doesn't work, times of day, all of that sort of thing happens through that. As a matter of fact, David, it's funny. We were just looking at, we have this new map out. It's at map.KnowBe4.com. And basically it's showing reported phishing attacks that are going on. And I mentioned that, this morning we saw a lot more on the right side of the map, which is like Europe and stuff attacking the US. As we were just looking at this going into this later in the day, most of the activity had shifted over to the left side just based on time zone. So they know, they know when they're doing these attacks and where to attack and when. It's pretty wild how much data and analytics go into these. And that's really how they're so successful.
Yeah, the attacks are just getting so smart. I mean, I was hit by one this week. I was doing some Office 365 stuff, and just shortly thereafter, I got an email that said something about Office 365 security failed. Click here. And I clicked there. And while it was loading, I was like, wait, why did I click that? And I went back and it was a phishing email. And I'm like, stop, no.
Yeah, undo, right? Yeah.
But it looked completely realistic, and it was super timely, professional, everything. So it's very easy to get caught, and we have to be continually aware. So another question here they're asking is about, is there any advancement of counter AI systems to pick up on patterns of cyber attacks? Any tips on that, Eric?
I'm very hopeful that AI is going to help, especially in the endpoint protection range, and in some of the email filter, and gateway sort of things going on. Fact is, right now, even best of breed email gateways that are designed to do this are still passing about 10 to 15% of the attacks. Okay. I am very hopeful that AI is going to help us. On the flip side, if you don't think the bad guys are leveraging AI to farm through some of the big data and build these attacks, we're being a little naive there. This is a game of whack-a-mole, and every time we get good at something, they get good at something, and vice versa, and we're constantly upping our game. So yeah, I think AI is going to play into this, and I am a big fan of endpoint protection that leverages more than just signatures, right? the AI component or heuristic component is something that definitely needs to be there when we're looking at that. But I think we're still in a position where AI is a lot of a buzzword, and we're just getting to that point. Maybe this year we'll start seeing some really, really good things happening with it. But ultimately, again, everything we do, the bad guys counter, vice versa. It's lather, rinse, repeat, and I really don't see an end to that anytime soon.
Yeah, good advice. Good advice. Yeah, hopefully there's some more intelligent tools to help us in the future. But in the meantime, we just need to be vigilant and keep educating our users. It sounds like what you're telling us.
Yeah, and it's a layered approach. There's not just one thing. Okay, no, I'm not here to tell you that if you train your users, nobody's ever going to click on anything. But I'm also not going to tell you that if you put in an email gateway, all of a sudden you don't have to worry about breaches or a WAF. That your breach problem is gone. If you've been to an airport in like the Dallas area or Houston area, you've seen the posters that are up there like, "Oh, breaches are over. Just buy our equipment." And I want to scream every time I see one of those. It's a layered approach. We have to eliminate the risk at different layers. There is no solution for this, and I really don't know that there ever will be a single solution for these attacks.
All right, well, great advice and really mind-blowing presentation, Eric. I really enjoyed it today. I know you said this is one of your favorite topics. I think this is one of my favorite topics as well. So thank you for being on the event today.
Always happy to be here.
And thank you everyone out there in the audience for joining us on today's presentation. I hope you learned a lot as I did, and have a great day. Bye-bye. Oh, and for more information on KnowBe4, don't forget to visit KnowBe4.com. Thanks a lot.